Joining me right now on this is Rodney Scott. 24th was the 24th chief of the United States Border Patrol under two different presidential administrations, Trump and Biden, having left office in August of 2021. And he joins us now because you got really good insight on all of this. You know this all firsthand. And this comes on the heels, too, Rodney, of the administration now with new policies. You have the fast track, the quote unquote parole processing of people who are illegally entering, and now hundreds of thousands of illegal entrants crossing in. Now they could see mass deportations of non-Mexicans to Mexico, but everyone else, this is a mess.
Thank you, Dan, for having me on today. I think that's a perfect synopsis. This is a mess, and this is a national security threat to our country because we no longer know who or what is entering our country because we've given control to the cartels. The representative is absolutely 100% accurate when he says that.
Yeah, talking about the cartels for a moment, because it's not an understatement to say that they control literally everything that goes across the border. I mean, they are in complete control of all of northern Mexico and everything that goes over into the United States, correct?
Yeah, correct. And for your listeners out there, so they kind of really understand what that means. It doesn't mean Chapo Guzman has it. They have a network. It goes all the way down to what we call plaza bosses, and they literally control all of the terrain along the southwest border. And anything that gets near or crosses that border has to do so with their permission or risk death. It's that blatant. They own and control everything that crosses that border.
That, which is because I'm glad that you explained that, because I think a lot of people, they don't realize necessarily what that actually looks like, because it seems like the Mexican government's terrified of the cartels. I mean, they can't really do anything to stop what they're doing, because now it's not just drugs, it's human trafficking as well. They're making a lot of money at this. So there's a lot of incentive for their cartels to keep exploiting the federal government's inability to enforce the law at the border or expand our resources or add more border patrol.
Correct. And just to touch on that for a minute, please don't take this lightly because it's real, but there's a saying in Mexico, silver or lead. And it is real that basically you take the cartel's money or you face being murdered after your family and children are murdered. And I don't take light of that. That's a real threat to the government officials. There are still officials that stand up and try to do the right thing, but it's getting harder and harder to really separate the cartel and the actual government just because of that amount of violence against the government or monetary influence. And that's why many of us are talking about we really need to go after the cartels, similar to how we do the terrorist organizations around the world. They are a real threat.
We're talking with Rodney Scott, who was working with San Diego Border Patrol. He's a former San Diego Border Patrol chief, ran Border Patrol as well under Trump and Biden, respectively. The policy changes, there have been quite a bit since Biden has assumed office. I wanted to ask you, just the difference in your job between those two administrations. Give people some insight into that.
So to summarize, in the past administration versus the current administration gets a lot of attention, but I want everybody to know that is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about almost 30 years of my career, multiple different administrations versus the current administration, because it wasn't just the Trump administration that actually cared about border security. It was the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration. Every president that I'd worked under before was trying to secure our borders, and we were getting better and better and better at it. The minute that the Biden administration, really even during the campaign, but the minute that the president was inaugurated, everything flipped. And it was all about processing people as quickly as possible and releasing them into the United States so that you didn't have a visual of a backlog at the border. We tried to explain to them that that's just going to create an incentive for the next wave, even bigger and better, bigger and worse, actually, to come across. And that's exactly what's happened. If you look at the policies, every single policy that actually deters illegal activity in any way or makes Border Patrol agents more effective at actually patrolling the border and identifying threats has been reversed. And all the money that is currently being spent is being redirected towards processing facilities, improving computer systems to process people faster. And then as of late, like another $800 million grant to non-governmental organizations to provide shelter and feeding for migrants, instead of actually trying to secure the border and simply make sure that we know who and what is entering our country. It's a complete reversal, not just from the Trump administration, but really from the from the beginning of Border Patrol back in 1924 until now, the Biden administration basically wiped out all that progress.
A lot of progress wiped out. It seems like he should have talked more about that at the State of the Union address, and obviously he did, and he touched on it briefly and then moved on to something else that had to have been disappointing.
It was very disappointing, but not shocking, because this is intentional. So he's not going to call it a failure. They campaigned on an open border. They have a plan. I do believe they're acting on their plan. This is not incompetence or accidental. This is an intentional plan that they're carrying out each day. I think the reason that we keep talking past each other, like in the political realm, is they don't see this as a problem. They literally do not see this as a problem. They're doing nothing to try to slow it down. But anybody that understands the sustainable security, the security that Americans want and deserve, understands that you just can't let anybody pour across into our home without them being vetted on a daily basis.
True. Absolutely true. Yeah. Talking with Rodney Scott, 24th Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol under Trump and Biden. He left in August of 21. I want to touch on for a moment all the asylum talk, because whenever you hear the president or the vice president or really any Democrat elected official, they act like every single person who's coming over the border is fleeing some sort of, horrific government, and they're asylum seekers and they need to go through the process. That's not how the process works, though. You don't go to the country to which you're seeking asylum and then file. You always do it in your country first. This is one of the things I know that you've touched on previously, but this is one of the things that Biden's changing that's not going to help anything at all. Talk to us about that.
Correct. So I want to break apart refugee versus asylum.
Right.
So refugee, you usually apply from your country. But by definition, asylum, you're fleeing. You're trying to run away from some type of imminent danger. There's a classification, though. They call it political asylum for a reason. It's got to be like government persecution because of a protected class. It is not to do with economics. But the minute you're safe, you're supposed to be safe. So that should be the very first country that you arrive in. And that's what the last administration, we were setting up agreements. We call them safe third country agreements. But basically, we are working with Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, many different countries to make sure if someone was fleeing some kind of persecution, we could get them to a safe location. But that should be the first safe country. You shouldn't be able to country shop, nation shop to get whatever you want. With that said, a lot of the crossings currently, and there's some dynamics here, but a lot of the crossings currently, the migrants have been coached and taught to say, when asked by a Border Patrol agent, that they fear going back to their country and or that they fear going back to Mexico. When you dig into that, though, and by the way, that's the first bar. That means they get put aside and then handed off to an asylum officer for a credible fear hearing. That process is what they keep talking about, but it doesn't meet, the economics doesn't meet the criteria of asylum. So if you walk down that path until the very end, when a judge looks at the case, over 90% of the quote unquote asylum claims are deemed either fraudulent or they just don't meet the criteria, and they're ordered removed. But the problem is there's no ICE ERO allowed in that courtroom. So they just walk out. And then under the current administration's priority memo, they are not a priority for arrest because they haven't done anything except enter the country illegally. So less than 6% of those people ever leave. The Remain in Mexico program, by the way, made sure that even if your claim was completely frivolous, you got your day in court, you got an opportunity to see a judge, but you could not be released into the country until a judge made a decision.
Wow.
And as soon as they knew that there was integrity in the system and they weren't going to get released, most of them went home. That was a big part of how we secured the border in the last administration. We got rid of a lot of the clutter by putting integrity back into the asylum process. The other thing that really did is it actually let us get to the people that really truly need help, need asylum, they're fleeing persecution, and it allowed us to help them with the legal process. Now they're way back in the line somewhere. We can't even get to them.
And that's the sad part, because there are legitimately individuals who are fleeing for their lives. It's a small number of folks, but they do exist. And now it's like they just got to get back. And like you just said, it doesn't seem like they matter, because now everybody can be that, even if they're not. One last question for you, because I was actually shocked that San Diego was the epicenter, that these border seizures for fentanyl. I don't know why, but it just sort of shocked me because, California, you have a lot of laws, apparently doesn't really do a lot of stuff. The national epicenter for fentanyl trafficking, because of because all this coming over the border, it spiked this year. And we have a major opioid epidemic. And I know a lot of different administrations have contributed to this. I definitely don't lay it at the feet of one. And I think that almost every single administration and some, could have done, maybe a little bit more, could have done something. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this because, here we have an opioid crisis in the United States. Fentanyl seizures continue to spike. The president talked about the fentanyl crisis at the State of the Union address, noted a family in the First Lady's box, didn't even mention that it's because of the open border, that's why this has been allowed to increase as such. Right. How much has it been allowed to increase?
So I want to clear a few things up. So San Diego does have the most seizures.
Seizures, okay.
That is often portrayed as the most traffic, but no one knows. So I want to remind everybody, you got to back up to the 90s, and right after CBP was created, the border security strategy really was built out in trial and error in San Diego. You might remember the border wall prototypes. They were in San Diego for a reason. That is where we started reestablishing control of the border. They have more border infrastructure between the ports of entry, meaning a border wall, technologies and cameras than almost anywhere else in the country. And we invested, meaning CBP, millions of dollars in improving the technology and the detection capabilities at the ports of entry. But by forcing the traffic, and you have the Sinaloa cartel to the south, there's a lot, and the legacy Tijuana cartel. But basically, you have that big city, right? So you have a lot of infrastructure that they always want to try to cross through there. But here's the deal. They have to meet a CBP officer. They're going to meet a law enforcement officer and be inspected. You're definitely going to have a higher number of seizures there. But the only reason that they're going through that port is because we made it very difficult to go around it. Break. Currently, by the way, the same cartels that operate at the ports of entry operate in between the ports of entry. All they're trying to do is push their commodity, whether it be people or whether it be goods, through the easiest mechanisms. So if you go a little bit farther to the east, all of a sudden the border wall got shut off. We have hundreds of miles of border where we patrolled it through agents, but now those agents have been pulled off and they're dealing with or processing these fraudulent asylum seekers. And the cartel uses that. They get big groups of illegal aliens, they push them across from remote areas, and that wipes out all Border Patrol's logistics. It literally wipes out all the law enforcement that they have in the area. And then the second wave comes through untouched. Those are what we call gotaways. I also need to highlight, though, we only know about the gotaways in places we have technology once the agents pull out, and there's still hundreds of miles, there's no technology. Wow. So the seizures at the ports are important, but what came through when the cartel systematically and intentionally overwhelmed the Border Patrol agents created these huge gaps and several trucks drove across.
Wow.
I believe that there is no shortage of fentanyl, heroin, or cocaine in any major city in the United States.
I agree.
We need to talk about what's getting away and how we don't even know what's crossing through sections of border and stop focusing so much on the known. The knowns are huge successes. We know it because we've invested in a strategy that this administration has completely walked away from. But we could be getting those same seizures in other places and then actually reducing the availability of these drugs and driving the price of the drugs up if we would secure the rest of that border.
This is just amazing. Just the way that this is just, gosh, there's so many things that we could do. Rodney Scott, appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for just giving us some insight into just, how this came to be, how it's happening, how it's continuing to get worse, and hopefully we can get it solved. That would be nice. I know you would like that, and I know all the awesome border agents that are there. I've seen the ground that they got to run. I can't even imagine doing that job and the stress of it with all the ground you have to cover day in and day out. We appreciate what you do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dane. Appreciate it. We had a plan. We handed it to the current administration, and they threw it away.
There you go. That's sad. It's everybody's loss. Everybody's loss. Rodney Scott, appreciate you. Thank you so much.